It's all about character. Nothing else on two wheels delivers the visceral thrills of a two-stroke engine. They deliver a hit of power every other stroke, where a four-stroke manages only half as many. This means that power potential, for its capacity, is greater than a four-stroke. Here is an example. Did you know that? In MotoGP, 500cc two-strokes raced against the 990cc four-strokes. Two-stroke cycle engine is a type of internal combustion engine that completes a power cycle with two strokes up and down movements of the piston during one power cycle. This power cycle being completed in one revolution of the crankshaft. The first commercial two-stroke engine involving cylinder compression is attributed to Scottish engineer Dougald Clarke, who patented his design in 1881. The first truly practical two-stroke engine is attributed to Yorkshireman Alfred Angus Scott, who started producing twin-cylinder, water-cooled motorcycles in 1908. Two-stroke engines are simpler and lighter than four strokes. They are however less torquey and tractable than four strokes, as well as dirtier. The fact that signed the death warrant of new road-going two-strokes of any useful capacity. In 1904, Scott patented the two-stroke parallel twin. In 1939, MZ developed the RT125, which will also form the basis of the BSA Bantam, as part of reparations post-World War II. In 1956, Villiers, the British two-stroke engine manufacturers, whose admittedly uninspiring power units are used by many manufacturers, produces its 2 millionth engine. In 1961, DDR's East German racer, Ernst Degner, defected to the West, bringing MZ and Walter Carden's two-stroke racing secrets with him. Degner signs for Suzuki. In 1962, Degner won Suzuki's first GP World Championship in the 50cc class. In 1963, I was born. In 1970, MZ builds its millionth motorcycle, an MZ ETS 250 Sport. In 1970, the Yamaha FS1E moped, first offered for sale. Affectionately termed the Fizzy and, by far away the best and most popular of the 1970s sports mopeds. In 1971, Jack Findlay and his Suzuki TR500 at the Ulster GP were the first two-stroke winners in the 500 GP class. In 1973, Yamaha produced its first RD350, a two-stroke motorcycle. In 1974, Suzuki's RG500 was the first square 4 two-stroke in the 500 GP class. Yamaha became the first two-stroke and the first Japanese 500 constructors champions. In 1975, Giacomo Agostini on Yamaha claimed his final 500 class GP title in a first for the 500 two-stroke. In 1978, Suzuki launched the first 100 miles per hour two-stroke Road 250, the air-cooled X7. In 1980, Yamaha launched the RD350LC. Grown men continue to go weak at the knees. In 1981, I joined art school. In 1984, sale of road-going two-stroke banned in the USA. In 1986, I was graduated from art school and got my first job as an illustrator in an advertising agency. In 1990, I bought my first two-stroke bike, Yamaha RX 100. In 1992, bought my second two-stroke bike, Yamaha RD350. In 1994, I bought my third bike, Yamaha XV750 Virago. In 2001, Valentino Rossi's first 500 title is also the last for a two-stroke in the Premier class. The following year, 500cc two-strokes continue to race against the new 990cc MotoGP four-strokes. In 2004, last of Aprilia's RS250 two-stroke sports bikes twins sold in the UK. The two-stroke engine is relegated to small-capacity scooters only. In 2011, the end of two-strokes in GP racing as the 125 class was the last to give them up, to be replaced by Moto 3 four-strokes. Nicholas Tyrrell took the title. In 1963. It was disappointing when Yamaha factory rider Fumio Ito-san, who could have won the 1963 Isle of Man TT on the 250cc Yamaha RD56 if it hadn't been for wasting 50-second fuel stop. In addition, later year, Ito-san was also sidelined by a crash in 1964. Phil Reed went on to take the 250cc Grand Prix World title. Yamaha factory teams continued to dominate the 125 and 250 classes at world level until 1968. In 1967, Yamaha launched its first 350cc street bike, the YR1, as little more than a big bore version of Yamaha's 250cc twins. By 1962, the 250 had evolved into the 19-horsepower YD3 Roadster, with a pressed steel backbone frame and electric start, and it was joined in 1963 by the sporty but kickstart-only 25-horsepower YDS2. The big development came in 1964, with the YDS3. Until then, almost all two-strokes were lubricated by mixing oil with the fuel, a tiring and haphazard process that also required always having a bottle of two-stroke oil at hand. Yamaha's innovation called Autolube was carrying engine oil in a separate tank, injecting it into the engine at the carburetor by way of a small oil pump driven by the transmission input shaft. The fuel and oil ratio was determined by engine speed and throttle opening. In In 1965, Yamaha introduced its first bigger banger, the 305cc Yamaha YM1, which lasted 2 seasons, before being replaced by the full 350cc YR1. Next to arrive, in 1970, was the 5-speed Yamaha R5, produced until 1972. The next year would bring bigger changes. For 1973, the Yamaha 2-stroke twins took a huge leap forward, with the RD250 and RD350. An extra cog went into the transmission to give 6 speeds, while up front a disc brake provided the extra stopping power. This now potent package needed for the final 1975 model year. The Yamaha RD350 was universally lauded by the motorcycle magazines. Take the RD350 out on a favorite stretch of hilly, winding road, where the 6-speed transmission and powerful front disc brake can be used to their fullest, and you'll find a race-bred motorcycle in a street machine's clothing. Little to criticize on the RD350, except its cold-blooded starting habits, which required full choke and a 1-minute warm-up before it would take any throttle. Contrary to popular belief, there's no evidence supporting the idea that RD in the Yamaha RD350 model designation stands for neither the race-derived nor rapid death. But race-developed, it certainly was. The big change in '73. Apart from the new RD name, that's race-developed, by the way, was the adoption of reed valves. The change helped the RD350 get to around 39 horsepower, while the smaller RD250 hovered somewhere around the 30 horsepower mark. A front disc brake was soon added to reflect their increased performance, although some very early RDs still had their predecessors' drums, like the one that I own till today. The first big visual change for the RD line came in '76, when a squared-off coffin tank replaced the curvy original design. However, the more notable update was the fact that the RD350 was gone, replaced with the up-engine RD400. The extra 50cc came by way of a new crankshaft, which upped the larger bike's stroke from 54mm to 62mm. Power rose to 44 horsepower, but the more important was the torque increase. It rose spectacularly from 24 lb-ft to 30 lb-ft and helped make the RD400 a much less peaky machine to ride. The RD250 and RD350 had already made names for themselves by the time the 1979 models went out of production, but the 1980 replacements were to make a huge leap forward. Yamaha added water. Far from diluting the recipe that made the RDs successful, a splash of liquid turned them into the ultimate early 80s hooligan sports bikes. Suddenly, these were modern bikes. Forget that 1960s lineage of the original RDs. The new LC, liquid-cooled, RDs were as close as you could get to road-going versions of the TZ250 and TZ350 racers. Given the leap that the RD350 LC represented, you might have forgiven Yamaha for having a breather, but development of the 2-stroke showed no sign of abating. Just 3 years after the water-cooled RDs emerged, Yamaha added the now legendary YPVS power valve system. Suddenly, the RD250's power increased to 46 horsepower, basically the same as the previous year's 350. and the RD350's output was up to a heady 59 horsepower. At the same time, the styling was revised to give a much closer link to the old TZ race bikes. YPVS Yamaha power valve system increases engine output with a valve which operates in the exhaust passage. This valve controls exhaust port timing in response to engine speed, despite the extremely high thermal load encountered in the exhaust passage. Simply put, Yamaha uses a cable from a computerized mechanical control unit that detects the ignition frequency and determines the required angle of the valve as needed for the engine. Yamaha's YPVS system uses a valve that is raised and lowered into the exhaust port at an angle to allow air through the port. RD's lineage began, fairings were something that only race bikes used. But by 1985, we were seeing a revolution in sports bike design. The GSXR 750 had appeared, for a start, as had machines like Honda's NS400R. Suddenly the RD looked like it needed something new to bring it back into contention. The RD350F in some markets of RZ350R was the solution. F stood for full fairing. And that's exactly what the F model got, replacing the small headlight shroud used on its predecessor. For those still skeptical of this newfangled aerodynamics, Yamaha also released the RD350M, with simple, round headlight and no front bodywork at all. These days it would probably be labeled a street fighter or a cafe racer. Back then it was just a motorcycle. Another update again. Yes. But it would be the last for a while. The RD350F and N models didn't get a long life. After a single year, they were superseded by the imaginatively titled F2 and N2 versions. By now, the RD250 had reached the end of its life. The arms race around the 250cc class was starting to heat up, and the aluminium beam-framed TZR250 appeared as the RD250's replacement. In 1986, RD350C production started to shift from Japan to Brazil, cutting costs and helping Yamaha start to reposition the bike as a simpler sports bike sitting below the exotic, expensive alloy-framed machines that were starting to become the norm. The RD250 and RD350 might have molded whole generations of riders through the 1970s and 80s. But another machine wearing the RD badge remains the most desirable of the bunch. It's Yamaha's 4-cylinder Grand Prix replica, the RD500LC. Given that the main complaints leveled against the RD500LC were that its steel frame wasn't at the same bleeding edge of technology that its alloy-framed rivals explored. It's a shame that the firm didn't opt to widely offer the Japanese market RZV500R. Why? Because although it looked almost identical to the RD500LC, the RZV500R was actually a much more exotic beast. The big change was the chassis. The RZV500R, of which just 1,600 examples were made, featured a hand-welded aluminium frame that helped slice around 10 kilograms off the overall weight of the bike. Yamaha puts it at 173 kilograms dry. To go with that exotic frame, there was also higher spec, adjustable forks. On the downside, Thanks to its Japanese market rules, the RZV500R's engine was limited to a mere 64 horsepower, with different jetting and restrictor plates in the exhaust. That's easily remedied, though. Although, the age of two-strokes ended years ago. There's still an unparalleled cachet to a sporty two-stroker. The sound, and the smell, of a two-stroke, are rare these days. Replaced with modern retro, with new technology, but when one rides past, it's enough to bring a cascade of memories and desires, to anyone old enough to remember their heyday. While most of the big biking brands competed in the two-stroke market, Yamaha's long-lived RD range, and particularly the legendary RD350, has a special place in the era's history. The RDs weren't Yamaha's first two-strokes. The firm had been churning them out since its genesis. The very first YA1 made in 1955 was a stroker. But with the RD range, starting in 1973, it really hit its stride. For me, it's been over 33 years with my Japanese-made, the first generation RD350. Ever since I had started this blog, I wanted to get to the bottom of it and tell you all about this special love of my life that I preserved till date. Once I was riding it daily to my work, reaching my office even before I got into fourth gear, pub hopping, long weekend rides, and on some weekends I visited the garage for maintenance. A garage that once was, but today it's no longer there, and the man whom I dealt with passed away long ago. Today it's not easy to find a person with those skills and who understands this machine. No, definitely not where I come from. The only help now is DIY with some trial and error. However, I do meet some admirers who know her, and some lunatics who want to get their hands on her. A cat calling. She is cool. I knew her. How much? In addition, the most stupid question of all, the fuel economy. Fuel economy? It's much more expensive than having a mistress. However, it's still a joy to own a RD350.